Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I'm your host, AP Strange, and this is my show. Today's show is brought to you by the Junior G-Man Flying Saucer Investigator Kit. If you want to be a real G-Man investigating flying saucers, this kit has everything that you want in it, as long as you're just playing around. You can be your own Junior G-Man. Kids, it's good for the kids out there. I realized that these things are very affordable. The Junior G-Man Flying Saucer Investigator Kits. They come with their own Men in Black style Homburg hats and all that, and they're affordable for your Christmas gift list for the youngster that you know that wants to be a Junior G-Man. And we realize times are tough, and you may not be able to afford all the dolls this year, so the Junior G-Man Flying Saucer Investigator Kit is the way to go. And it's appropriate that we have some flying saucer investigation toy kits this time around, because I have a great guest. We were chatting just now before we got recording, and we're getting along famously, so this will be a lot of fun. He's a UFO buff. He's a writer for the Podcast UFO blog. He's also a playwright and an actor, and he's the author of the book, The Flying Saucer Investigators, for which he's working on a sequel called The UFO Investigators. It's a really cool book. I'm very happy to have him on. Welcome to the show, Charles Lear. How are you doing?
Very good, AP. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on, man. This is going to be fun, because you hit me up and you're like, we should talk flying saucers. And I said, absolutely, because there's nothing I enjoy more, and I think my show has had a lack of flying saucer episodes, so this is really good, good stuff. One question I had for you right off the bat is, where did your fascination with flying saucers begin?
I know it's cliche, but I as long as I can remember, I've been interested in all things paranormal. But
Okay.
the flying saucers in particular, when this new invention, the internet, came along, the my very first thought was, oh my God, I can see all the flying saucer pictures I can find. So
Yeah.
that was the first pictures I wanted to look at, which makes me a total nerd as opposed to what most males want to look at on the internet.
But yeah.
I was really excited about finding flying saucer pics on the internet.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I on television every single time there would be a documentary on flying saucers or UFOs back in the days when they scheduled such things and you had to wait for them to be broadcast. I always would set aside those evenings and look forward to them with bated breath, as well as, every single X-Files episode. I was there the night of the broadcast. And so, yeah, as long as I can remember, I think, but a real cool thing, one thing that got me really focused and educated on them was there was this video store in the East Village called Kim's Video, and it was famous. It was famous back in the day. It's no longer there. and they had every flying saucer documentary you could imagine in there. So I started checking those out, and I watched every damn one of them over and over again. And then there was
Right.
another video store in Williamsburg. They had a great collection. So I started remembering things more and more and knowing, what case was what and who was what, and the names started getting familiar. And then about 2019, I started writing about him for Willis over at Podcast UFO, and that's how I've become quite educated in the. I write a blog every single week, so doing that, coming up with something, that's uh, 2019. That's 6 years, so you figure 52 weeks a year. 52 cases a year,
Yeah.
or more, sometimes multiple in one blog. That's a lot of stuff. So, and I've retained most of it too. So much of it.
Yeah, there you go. Well,
Anyway,
yeah, I mean, I tend to think there's no better way to learn how to write or learn the history of a subject than to just jump in and write about it, uh, especially with that kind of strict timetable that you're working on, where you got to get them out every week. It's like a crash course in training yourself and remembering all these things.
yeah, you learn to be concise, and
Yeah, yeah,
also I've learned where all the archives are. So, my go-tos are uh, archives for the unexplained in Sweden. There's the Northern Ontario UFO research site, and I think he's having issues, but and other places like NICAP's site and QFOS's site, and you find a lot of like original case files. NICAP has a lot of case files in there, uh,
yeah,
and so yeah,
yeah, yeah. So I did want to ask you this too, just so my listeners are clear in full disclosure. Are you related to John Lear in any way?
no comment,
No comment. All right, you're not allowed to talk about it. Possibly Norman Lear,
no comment.
King Lear.
Okay, yes. No, I am not related. Uh, to my knowledge, I'm not. I think my family has mentioned a relationship to Bill Lear, which would follow me being related to John Lear, but it's
Yeah,
nowhere near close enough to have benefited from Bill Lear's Lear jet money, or his
right.
eight, or he also invented the 8-track tape, so I didn't get any of that either.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's good because I mean, I suppose you'll have to cover John Lear in the book you're working on now.
Well, I already have him crashed Saucers and Malevolent Aliens, uh,
Okay.
and that him and the UFO dark side, I covered him extensively.
Yeah, yeah,
And his rise to power along with Bill Cooper on the Paranet,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and his subsequent, well, Bill Cooper's subsequent crashing and burning, and John Lear's slow dying fizzle out.
Right, right. See, like I feel like that's important stuff to know about these days, especially for normies that might be really uh, out of the loop and really really confused by the kinds of like conspiracy talk that go on nowadays. It's like you have to understand these guys were active and had their influence like in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that I totally covered that in Crashed Saucers, and the the thing I realized as I was writing it, as I was learning a lot of stuff as I was writing it. And the big thing I learned about occurred to me was that there's this feedback loop going between military intelligence insiders who have an honest interest in UFOs and flying saucers, and the UFO community who they reach out to and who reach out to them talking back and forth. Basically, I heard from a guy who heard from a guy kind of stuff. It's created a feedback loop that goes on today, which showed up dramatic, very vividly in David Grush's testimony, which was all anecdotal. Just everything he said was just anecdotal. Like I said, I heard from a guy who heard from a guy. And what's really
Yeah.
interesting is Bruce Maccabee wrote about it in this. He wrote a paper called Hawk Tales. It's his interview with Ernie Kellerstrass. So he doesn't name him by name, but in the aviary, uh,
Hmm.
Kellerstrass was Hawk. And but I'll sidetrack real quick. The aviary is this mythical UFO working group. It totally came from Bill Moore, and Bill Moore has said this from Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray giving their government contacts bird names, and
Yeah.
that turned into its own mythos. But Kellerstrass's bird name was Hawk, and during his interview with Maccabee, it came out that the remote viewing program, some of the guys in the remote viewing program were saying they were talking to the saucer people and
Hmm.
wanting to try and get some kind of confirmation that, maybe there really was some kind of communication going on. The military and intelligence people reached out to the UFO community, and Maccabee wrote, this has created a perhaps unwanted connection between the remote viewing program and ufology.
Right.
So,
Because they had enough problems, like just, yeah,
yeah,
with
and
remote
and
viewing, yeah,
yeah,
making it palatable to people anyway. Yeah.
yeah, and Maccabee definitely was an insider. He worked on the Star Wars program. I think, lasers, optics were one of his specialties. So,
Wow.
yeah, he
Well,
definitely,
now, I mean, Putoff was part of the aviary, wasn't he?
yeah, he was another. He he had another bird name. He might have been Pelican if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I was thinking Pelican, but I wasn't sure. But yeah, I mean, so then you have a direct connection with that remote viewing and the aviary with him there. And he's
Yeah,
still involved. He's still in the background now with a lot of the stuff.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, so that that all comes up in Crashed Saucers. I covered all of that, and
Okay, so Crash Saucers is that a book that I'm
that
not aware of, or is that a blog post?
yeah, no, that's the second book. That's the book I wrote after Flying Saucer Investigators. The Flying Saucer
Oh, okay,
Investigators is now. I just put it out in its second edition because Philip Mantle, the publisher, is having health issues, so he is closing up shop. Except for his, I think he's got maybe a couple bestsellers, a couple books that still really sell really well, which were the ones he had. Charles Hickson, excuse me, not Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker.
right,
He published Calvin Parker's books, so he cleared the portfolio, and mine was part of that. So I had to put this out in a second edition to keep it out there. Um,
okay,
so
yeah. Well, I mean, I hope Philip's doing okay. He's done a lot of work over the years, and I've always enjoyed his voice in the world and his publishing. So,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. So Crash Saucers it came out because uh, as I was getting started on the follow-up to the Flying Saucer Investigators, the UFO Investigators, I realized what a mess the 80s was. I said, well, let me just, I started dealing with it just in a series of blogs for Martin, mainly a good summation of the 80s. For me, the 80s culminated in UFO Cover Up Live, which was a ridiculous train wreck of a show. So I
yeah,
wrote a blog behind the scenes of uh, UFO Cover Up Live, and then I also wrote a series of blogs on the implosion of abductology when the scandal with Mark Jacobs came out with him and Emma Woods.
right,
Where
right,
he suggested he was hypnotizing her over the phone as one of his subjects, preparing to write a book about her, and convinced her she might have been raped by an alien human hybrid. And while she was under hypnosis, he suggested she send him her unwashed panties so he could test them for alien sperm. And that
Yeah.
came out, and yeah, so abductology kind of imploded there. So I expanded both of them into Crush, Saucers, and Malevolent Aliens, just to get all the
Well, I
craziness.
mean, you say it imploded, but the thing is that there are plenty of people out there still going to bat for David Jacobs, which blows my mind. Because if you listen to those tapes, if you actually hear him, because Emma Woods herself recorded it, I think she had her own recordings separate from him,
Yeah,
um, and it was included on the Paratopia podcast with Jeremy Vaney and Jeff Ritzman. You can, if you go back in their old episodes, you can hear those, and it is uncomfortable to listen to because
yeah,
he is being so coercive, and it blows my mind that there's anybody out there nowadays that thinks Jacobs has any credibility at all. But there are.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It goes on. So, yeah, I'm just like, I know my book isn't going to be the last word, but
Yeah.
it so yeah, put that out just to get it out of the way so I could focus on the credible stuff, the stuff I see as being, credible in the UFO investigators, which I'm about a third of the way in. But the flying saucer investigators was a lot of fun to write, and I'm really happy with this edition. Had some issues with the edition that I put out with Philip. It was basically because I didn't know how to properly format a book. So, and I kind of didn't know that it was up to me to do so. Because I never dealt with a flying saucer publisher, book
Yeah.
publisher before. It's I don't know. So yeah, it it came out a little clunky. It's uh, a larger format, and some of my block quote formats got screwed up. But this the second edition I put out now I've learned how to format a book properly, and uh, I got came up with a cover I really like, and it's a nice tight 6 by 9 format, and it looks a lot sharper. Uh, so I'm real happy with that. And
Well,
it
that's
was,
good.
yeah, and
I
it was
mean,
a lot of,
the content is great. I mean, and it's I think there's a certain charm to flying saucer books anyway because of that. Because
yeah,
I mean,
I concur.
often they end up being kind of an amateur affair in some way or another, from like the saucer zines of like the teen ufologists in the 60s to contactees trying to write their own story or have it ghost written by somebody else,
Yeah,
or the small time publishers or the bigger publishers that have to contextualize it some way that make it palatable for a big audience.
yep,
There's a charm to it where I think it's almost its own kind of form of outsider literature, you know.
yeah, right on. But yeah, I concur.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I mean, I think that's what's great about your book too. The Flying Saucer Investigators book is you're focusing on the people. I think you say in the introduction that it's like whether or not you believe in UFOs or what they are or whether it means life on other planets, like you can't deny that these people existed and their own little stories about how they dedicated so much of their time to unraveling the mystery or covering it in some way, um, is worthy of consideration. And it's really kind of cool how you focus on the investigators themselves. Um, so I mean, I can imagine that was a lot of fun for you to write.
very much, very much. And it's a great time to write about as well because it was still really a subculture. I mean, a much smaller subculture. And it's still a subculture today. And a lot of people in UFO world forget that. And when it's
Yeah.
just it's like, you know what? I talk to coworkers, for instance, who one of my coworkers, his wife and her family, had a classic flying saucer UFO sighting. They lived up around the Pine Bush area in New York, which is rather, you know, famous hotspot, and had a classic sighting where they saw saucer as they're driving, and then it went away, and then when they got home, it was hovering over their house. And he tells me that story. And so he's obviously got that kind of interest in it. But then as an experiment, I said, "Hey, Ilya, who is Lou Elizondo?" "I have no idea." And it's like, yeah, right. So when things get really angry and vociferous, it'd be nice to remind people, hey, you know what? There's not a whole lot of us that know who these people are. But
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's this whole drama that's playing out for a very small audience.
mhm.
And it was funny because my main go-to for social media for the longest time was Twitter, and I'm off of it now. I don't want to feed Elon Musk's AI at all, so I don't touch it. But UFO Twitter, like hashtag UFO Twitter, was a thing on there, and I would always I'd like to go kick the hornet's nest once in a while and rile those guys up, um, which didn't make me very many friends. I got blocked by a lot of people. Um,
Can imagine.
but these people all acted like the utopia was on the horizon, like a
Yeah.
brand new day was coming when disclosure was going to land. And I'm like, do you realize that it's a very small percentage of people compared to the world population that are on Twitter, let alone within this micro niche hashtag of UFO Twitter. Like
Yeah.
you're not. They have such tunnel vision that they think this represents the whole world, and that
Mhm.
once disclosure comes out, that's it. Everybody has to recognize. It's they talked about it almost as like an evangelical would talk about the second coming of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually a little worried when I put out crashed saucers because I thought I was going to get holy hell for it.
Right.
For because it basically just points out all the BS. But as pointed out by other people, I might add, I wrote it. I write as much as possible with journalistic and the rigor of an historian and a journalist. Um, so I go to sources, and so I went to sources for all that stuff. It's not my opinion so much. I
Yeah.
mean, here's what this person said about this. This is how this person, called out, for instance, compared Jesse Marcel's statements about his military career versus his military records, and how they didn't match. So.
Right.
But the flying saucer investigators, like I say, it was a really small subculture back then, and it's really neat how it kind of came out of and mirrored the science fiction subculture, which is also super small. And everything, really came out of Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver, pretty much laid the groundwork for the whole thing. And not only that, Palmer's a guy who put Kenneth Arnold into print first, and Arnold, that it's so difficult talking about Ray Palmer and Kenneth Arnold without saying Arnold Palmer. But
Yeah. Right.
but Ray Palmer actually paid Kenneth Arnold to investigate Maury Island, and I wrote in a book that Kenneth Arnold was actually the very first uh, funded private flying saucer investigator.
Hmm.
Um, but the like I said, the science fiction subculture really was very close to the what happened with the flying saucers subculture, and they had their zines. They had communicated with each other through the zines and the letters, and yeah, then when the flying saucer investigators came out, their zines and magazines and like the APRO bulletin, just the communication between everybody, and then also when you get these uh, little bickerings and little feuds going on, and just
Oh yeah.
the dialogue you can pick out between. I've actually wrote about that. I very much inspired by Aaron Gullius, who did a whole thing on the zine scene back in the day.
Yep.
I kind of, as I was going through all the zines, it really came out very clearly. Like uh, Coral Lorenzen's feud with Jim Moseley was very cute. It
Yeah.
was funny because, she took herself very seriously, and Jim Moseley just set herself up perfectly for Jim Moseley to skewer her,
Right.
um, and mess with her. And of course, you have Gray Barker in there, and him and Jim Moseley having their fake feuds. Uh, Barker's mind thinking it'll increase circulation,
Yeah, and then kind of trolling John Keel at the same time.
which
Uh,
was awesome, just awesome. I
well,
mean,
see,
yeah,
I loved that about this book because um, a lot of people who would write a book like this, maybe with some kind of detachment from the subject, would start with Kenneth Arnold's sighting, and you start earlier. You talk about Palmer and you talk about Shaver, which that because that all really does lay the groundwork, uh, and it's great that you started there because I think classically that's the background to Arnold had been kind of minimized in a lot of ways. So as far as chronological order of things goes, it's really kind of cool that you put them right up at the front at the top of the book.
mhm.
And I think just for listeners, if you're listening to this and you don't really know your saucer history, this is an excellent primer because it just really hits all the right notes and all the bases that you need to put things in perspective with these personalities and how they interacted with each other. So
Yeah.
it's just a recommendation there for anyone that's doesn't have that quite straight.
Thank you very much for the promo there, AP.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no problem.
and yeah, the thing is it required focus too, because it's so it would be each one of these people could have a book, and a lot of them have a book written about them individually. So I mean, Donald
Right.
Keough book just came out about him. Gray Barker, somebody just wrote I should sorry, I don't know their name, but came out with the Saucerian, a book about Gray Barker, for instance.
Hmm.
Jim Moseley took care of himself very well with uh, Shockingly Close to the Truth, Confessions of a
Right.
Grave Robbing Ufologist, an awesome book. So yeah, every one of them. Uh,
Yeah, I could tell you referred to that one a bunch for the research.
yeah, that's my favorite saucer book ever. Though Gray Barker's book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. That's an amazing book, and what's interesting is I was going through and editing, you know, just cleaning up this book for the second edition. It was really clear to me how much I set up my book based on Barker's book,
Yeah,
because that's he starts, that was written in I think I came out 56,
sounds right. Yeah,
and it it's a real good slice of history. It's, I think, Barker at his finest. And, the cases he mentions in there, like he's got one case about a guy reporting seeing a six-armed, six-legged alien.
hmm,
And I'm like, what the F? And I looked it up, and sure enough, there's a newspaper article covering this. So,
wow,
Barker's book is a really nice slice of history, and also where he's talking about the working with the guys out in Jersey. Oh, I forget their names. They ended up becoming uh, working with Jim Moseley with saucers and celestial events. Uh,
Okay.
Celestial Events Research Society. There, I got it.
All right.
Uh, so yeah, he's working with these guys in Jersey, and um, and then found himself smack dab in the middle of the Bender mystery. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's, a real nice inside look at the whole Bender thing. So that's a really good book. And then, but yeah, it was kind of my guide rail to get started. And then once I was
Yeah.
off and running, and I had the APRO bulletin and the NICAP investigator, and um and Mosley's publications, and all these essentially just going through them chronologically and then pulling the stories and the key cases out of them, really told the story well.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought so. It was fun for me to revisit a lot of this stuff, and I was like, oh man, he really pretty much got everything. It's all in there. It's like all the best stuff that I feel like is important to know if you want to know the history and how it
Hmm.
all works together. Um, and just as a little side note here, you were talking about how these investigators at the time would communicate sometimes through like letters to the editor in these magazines. Um, to show you how much of a nut I am collecting this stuff, I have a copy of, I think it's Other Worlds magazine, where
Oh,
Albert Bender had put in a uh, uh, something in the editorial part of it for looking for people to help him with the IFSB, the
yeah,
International Flying Saucer Bureau, and that was what how Gray Barker came to know about Bender in the first place. Was
yep.
they started corresponding based on this ad that Bender had placed. So I sought out that issue that Gray Barker had read that in, just to make sure I have that in my collection.
Oh, wow. Oh, once I'm settled, I'll probably start collecting myself.
Yeah,
I've seen where that can go.
it's
I
addictive. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Martin Willis introduced me to David Marler when I was out in New Mexico, and uh, I went out to his place back when he still had everything in his essentially a converted garage in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and that was collecting gone crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
He had so much stuff, and his garage too, just full of stuff. But now he's fortunately got a real nice space. The Rio Rancho school system gave him a couple buildings, kind of a proof of concept sort of thing. And eventually, he's probably going to get a real nice permanent space in Rio Rancho for the National UFO Historical Research. I wish he had a simpler name. Sorry.
Right, yeah.
National
Well,
Historical Records Research Center. I think that's what it is. National UFO Historical Records Research Center. Um,
okay,
but it's a vast collection. I mean, it's the QFOS files, the NICAP files, and the APRO files.
that's a lot.
And
Yeah.
yeah, he had a lot of that helped me out. There was some stuff I couldn't find online that David helped me out with. Um, and also there's the Gray Barker collection at the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library
Hmm.
in Clarksburg. And I actually, what's really cool is, I pretty much finished the book, but I was able to uh, drop some stuff in because on my way when I was out in New Mexico, staying in Magdalena, New Mexico, where my father lives, and which is interesting because the town Lonnie Zamora was raised in,
Oh,
of the the policeman who
Coro.
saw the saucer in Socorro.
Yep.
And what's really cool is I was at a party talking to people who knew him, and they were talking about his radio interview, and somebody asked Lonnie Zamora, uh, uh, "So, what state were you in when you saw after you saw the flying saucer?" "Yeah, well, sir, I was in the state of New Mexico." So, uh, but um, so on my way back to, I lived there, I sheltered there basically during that thing that happened in 2020.
Hmm.
And on my way back, stopped at the Roswell Museum. And then, of course, along the way, I had to stop in Clovis, New Mexico. And that's where Buddy Holly recorded. And they've
Oh,
actually got a rock and roll museum there in Clovis, New Mexico, which is actually in the town basement of the town hall. And it's pretty
oh,
awesome because it's got the original recording equipment that Buddy Holly worked with. And also the fireballs, famous for Bulldog,
hmm.
um, and Torquay. And but anyway,
Do they have
uh,
any of his? Do they have any of his Stratocasters?
oh yeah, yeah, they have all kinds of stuff. It's amazing, and
I
it's
always thought that was cool about Buddy Holly is that he played a Strat in the '50s and like nobody else did. He was like the only one. He kind of made that cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. So, but I stopped in the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library and talked to David Houch and let me in. There was some issues because like it was still the pandemic. Uh, but Houch and I managed to talk my way in, and he was very gracious. He was the curator. I'm not sure if he still is curating right now, but that was amazing. And uh, there's one famous incident with Jim Moseley and Gray Barker is doing a hoax film of what's called the Lost Creek Saucer, where they hung a flying saucer from a fishing line in front of a car and drove it around and
Yeah, yeah.
so and Jim Moseley actually took it along with his lectures. But they the thing they used to cast it, they had it turned on a lathe, and that was in the collection. I actually got to hold the Lost Creek saucer thing. And also, there's all the correspondence with everybody's signatures from Mosley's to Bender's to Barker's to, just a lot, the who's who of ufology back in the day. And then I stopped at the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant and the Flatwoods Monster Museum. And, but basically, with the Gray Barker stuff, I was able to get some uh, the story. David Houchin had a really good story about how Barker wrote in they knew too much about flying saucers about being. I think he said he was approached by FBI people, and
Mhm.
basically why Barker um, got approached by some officials asking him about um, I think the International Flying Saucer Bureau,
Mhm.
and also what might have led Bender to actually shut down the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And there was a series of correspondence. There was a guy down in Washington, D.C., a Reverend, I forget his name, Reverend something, who was taking all these pictures, and he was taking pictures around official uh, places that were in restricted areas in Washington, D.C., and he got approached by FBI people. And
Right.
he wrote a letter to Bender while Bender was on vacation. And then Barker wrote his letter saying he was approached by somebody about the International Flying Saucer Bureau. It turns out this some guy in Clarksburg had a seizure, and he had one of Barker's cards on him, and that's how they knew. They went to Barker to say, do you know this guy? He had a seizure, blah blah blah, and Barker turns them into FBI people, but Houchen believes they were just local officials. But so Houchen
Yeah.
told me this story that Bender uh, has this letter from Barker and this letter from this guy down in Washington saying they've been approached by officials. And essentially, it it it's how was Houchen's opinion that this made Bender really paranoid and worried that the the net was tightening, and
Yeah, they're closing in on him.
they're
Yeah.
closing in on him. So, ooh, I better get out of this. So that was Houchen's theory. So I was able to put that in my book with a uh, uh, personal. What do you put that in the footnotes?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so is it his theory also that the three men, the men in black, were feds, or that maybe they didn't exist at all? I don't. Did he touch on that? The, are you still there? Crap. I think I lost you. Huh. Not sure what happened. Hello? Oh, you're on mute. Can you hear me now?
There, we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Oh, very good.
That's really weird because this is a recurring thing for me. Anytime I say Men in Black, the conversation gets interrupted.
Okay. Um,
I did an
so,
interview with Alan Greenfield once where we tried to talk about the Men in Black, and it was eerie. The whole thing got messed up. Like the audio was just completely unusable. It was like echoey. It had all these like there was another Alan Greenfield voice in the background going on. It was like really strange.
well, yeah, I can imagine between the two of you. I know some of your background. Yeah,
Right.
it's probably not a good idea. Uh, yeah, I'm pretty paranormal free myself. Well, actually, not really, but I've had a few incidences myself. But I've got a ghost at the Met that has been interacting with me.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
I work at the Metropolitan Opera in the metal shop, and when I take a nap during lunch, I put my feet up on my workbench, and I have a chair, and I lean back in my chair, and I put Motorhead on.
Mhm.
It's white noise, I guess, but it keeps out the distracting noise, and I go right out. And when lunch is over, I told my coworkers, the best way to wake, that they're happy enough to wake me up after lunch is over. I tell them tap on the bench. But this one day, I felt somebody jiggle my feet. Like literally, I felt somebody grab my toes and jiggle my feet. And I open my eyes, say thank you, and nobody's there. And
Wow.
that's happened repeatedly. And it's a very distinct, it feels just like that. And I never had it before. And it's like not something I have anywhere else.
Huh.
And yeah, so and then I got heard
Well, the
from
question is, does the ghost get the time right? Is it the end of lunch when they do it, or is it?
it's exactly the end
Yeah.
of lunch.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I'm thinking, maybe it's a former supervisor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to work.
Well, it's friendly, jiggling the feet. So, um,
That's
yeah,
crazy. Well, I'm of the opinion that probably all theaters are haunted. Yeah,
yeah,
like
absolutely. Yeah.
auditoriums. You always hear this. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
And it's funny, when I think about it, then when people, the concept of trickster comes up over and over again, especially in UFO world and paranormal in general. And I've worked in the theater my whole life, so I basically live with trickster. You know,
right.
and, um, But yeah, another good ghost story, and then we'll get back to the saucers. A coworker said he was on the stage, and on the stage when there's nothing going on, they have a ghost light. It's literally
Hmm.
just one single light that's out there. They call it a ghost light. And he said he saw this guy in a striped shirt walking across the stage, and it just fade out right in front of him. And that's the only, spook. Other than that, this guy is totally, you know, like straight up, non-paranormal type of guy who just laughs at UFOs, for instance, and other
Right.
paranormal kind of shit, except for the fact that he saw a ghost himself. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a full-bodied apparition will change your worldview, I think.
I
But
guess
it,
so. Yeah.
in my experience, though, when I've experienced things like that with people, they are able somehow to put it completely out of their mind and then forget about it. That it just doesn't fit, so they just kind of push it out, and it's like it's a strange phenomena. But I guess that's how a lot of people get by.
Yeah. Well,
You either get obsessed with it or forget about it.
yeah. I've been thinking. I was just thinking about that today. How like my coworker's wife and her experience with the flying saucer over the house, that didn't define them.
Hmm.
It's just one of those things, Yeah, we'll talk
Well,
about that, and then on to, but it didn't define them. Absolutely not obsessed about it. Uh, and I'm thinking, but then on the opposite side, you'll get somebody like, Betty Hill totally defined her life.
right.
Travis Walton totally defined his life. And yeah, there are
Yeah.
people where, either it's just one of those things, and
Yeah.
yeah, there's
Well, in
that.
some cases, I mean, there are the cautionary tales with it too, because there are those cases where it's defined somebody's life to their detriment.
Hmm.
In the flying saucer investigators, you covered Dale Spar, for instance,
Mm.
with the saucer named Floyd, and it's like really, really messed that guy up. It just kind of derailed his life in a way because he became, well, people were mocking him about it.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
Herbert Shermer, similar story where he was a police officer that was kind of ostracized for it. Um,
yeah. I think
and then
Shermer, didn't they dynamite his car or something awful like that? Because
I've heard recently that that was an exaggeration, or
okay,
that, yeah, that's apocryphal in some way. But yeah, that was always the story, is that somebody blew up his car and they were like hanging an effigy of him in town. They basically
yeah,
thought he was like the devil.
mhm,
It was terrible.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. Um, yeah, and then toward the end of your book, it's like you're talking about James McDonald, and that's a sad case too. It's a devastating story.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking about that today too. Hmm. Yeah, and and Woodrow Derenberger. He's the guy who met Indrid Cold.
Right.
His life went to hell as well, and as crazy as his story was, going to the planet Lanulos, populated by space nudists. Um,
Yeah.
the most ridiculous story you can imagine, and he stuck to it to his dying day, and even his daughter backs him up. Tanya, she,
Oh,
put out a second edition of his book,
I think
and
she passed away a couple of years ago too, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I believe she
Yeah.
did as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, she backs him up, and, that's Derenberger is one of the people who fascinated me most when I was writing this, because that's just quite a story. And, you know, uh, where do you, it's where do you draw the line between, is this guy what's he making up and what's real? It really, I think exploring Derenberger clued me into the idea that a lot of these things may be a legitimate strange experience because Derenberger had people backing him up as well, like witnesses he didn't even know, saying they saw a guy talking to a guy in front of some weird thing on the road as they were driving
Hmm.
by and reported it. There were multiple reports to the police, and when Derenberger reported this to the police himself, they didn't laugh him off. They said, yeah, we've heard some stuff tonight. So it seems like he really had a legitimate experience. And then once the spotlight got on him, and maybe some stuff started going on in his head and twisted some stuff around. And, people, it's weird what people getting a little attention, what getting a little attention can do to some people who aren't
Hmm.
prepared for it. Even as simple as, a mother a woman giving birth and everybody paying attention to her, and then it goes away, and then you've got Munchausen proxy syndrome, where she
Right.
still wants that attention, so she starts poisoning her own baby, or it people are effing weird. That's basically, but
Yeah.
but I started seeing this more and more, after really exploring Derenberger and considering it. And not laughing it off as just some really silly, yarn that this guy was spinning, saying, it seems to have a basis in truth, and then it seems to go off the rails a little bit. And then I started seeing, as I said, uh, I've written about a lot of cases, and I start seeing this kind of pattern where
Mhm.
this happens again and again and again. I really one of my favorite stories is a guy in Japan. He's a farmer, and his dog was barking. He gets up, and the story is he opened the door and he sees this thing that's like a four-armed octopus in a plastic spacesuit. Standing on two legs and the other standing on two arms. The other two arms are, like arms. And takes him aboard his ship, takes him to a planet, gives him a couple of rocks, and says, "Here, show this to your Earthling people as proof." And he takes it out and he shows it to, local scientists, and they say, "Oh, these are local rocks. You're nuts." Um,
Right.
and so, that's his initial story. And that made the paper. But then subsequent stories, this guy started claiming he had superpowers and could start earthquakes. So he went a little, so, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's, and, this is as open-minded as I am, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's something to this guy seeing a plastic suited
Right.
octopus-looking alien, you know. Uh, but,
Yeah. I
start it.
mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I have tended to think over the years that sometimes the most fantastic claims are maybe the ones most worth pulling apart and looking at, because
Uh,
in some cases you have to wonder why somebody would make up something so extremely absurd.
yeah.
If they wanted to be believed, they could stick with something a little bit more believable, you know.
Yeah, it was
Um,
like the whole thing with Joe Simonton with his space pancakes,
yeah,
like
yeah,
1961. And I titled that chapter "Who Would Make Up Such a Thing?" It's such an absurd
right,
story. Who the hell,
yeah,
especially this guy, when you look at him, and you look at what other people said about him. This is like a non-bullshit guy, and
right,
he's telling the story about getting pancakes from outer space people. It's like,
right.
what? Out of nowhere.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Buck Nelson was similar, like with his space dog and all that other stuff. And
yeah, I don't know what to make of Buck Nelson. Um, yeah, that's and for the listeners, Buck Nelson, if anybody's ever seen the picture of a guy with this holding up a sign in coveralls, just a real farmer looking guy holding up a sign that says Space Convention with the S backwards, that's
yeah,
Buck Nelson. I couldn't put it in my book because it's rights controlled.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there was a bit of a money making thing
Yeah,
going
but
on with
well,
that
I mean,
for
he had
sure.
that space convention, and but his book is so earnest. His
Yeah,
book, but he's still, talking about it, the 300-pound space dog named Bo, and he would
yeah,
sell Bo's hair at his conventions.
yeah.
Space
You,
dog hair.
well, you want to talk about an obscure thing? This is another obscure thing in my collection. Is I happened to find a tabloid magazine. I don't remember which one off the top of my head. It might have been like Midnight Star or something like that. And it had an article on the cover about like Lee Harvey Oswald and the Kennedy assassination. And that's why I bought it. I found it at an antique store. Flipping through it, in the editorial pages, Buck Nelson had written in to comment on an opinion article that had been in the prior issue about fat people on buses, and he was saying that they should have to pay double the fare because they take up. I could not believe it because I'm just flipping through this tabloid newspaper from the '60s, and
Well,
I'm
he had
just like,
something like that in his book, wasn't it? I mean, something about,
yeah,
I
and I
think,
was like, that
the
can't
the
be the same
the
Buck
weight
Nelson.
of beans or something like that.
Yeah,
How they how they shouldn't count the water as part of the weight in a can of beans. I think that's in his book. So he
right.
got concerned about stuff like that.
But he also invented one of the earliest UFO detectors. You could just
Oh,
basically
really?
hang a magnetic. Yeah, you would just
Okay.
hang a magnetic bar from a string. You would like put a thumbtack with a string into the ceiling, have a
Hmm.
magnetic bar hanging from it, and if it started spinning, that meant the saucers were nearby.
Yeah.
Because that would indicate a change in the electromagnetic fields.
All right.
So yeah,
A contactee I think who doesn't get nearly enough consideration is George Van Tassel. That's
I've I've been deep diving into him lately, and there's a lot there. As I
I
can see
mean,
why.
he was
Yeah,
like working with Howard Hughes. He was like really big in aerospace. And
yeah,
this guy had a serious, serious career and a serious, serious mind. And then all of a sudden, and his contact story isn't anywhere near like Adamski's.
right.
This sounds more, shamanistic type of thing, and he's got, there's a really good documentary out. Um, oh, I forget what the title is, but it's a documentary about Van Tassel, and he's got, I think it was his son-in-law, maybe, uh,
Mm,
talking about the night that Van Tassel was contacted. And, it, it really seems to me that there's something to look into. This guy went from this life to this life.
yeah.
Went from, serious aerospace guy, working with airplanes and Howard Hughes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to living under a rock in the middle of the desert, starting the
Whoa,
Universal Church.
it had an airfield attached to it though. Is
Oh,
the
there
thing.
is, yeah, yeah, there's that
Yeah,
too.
and he had the conventions there.
And what's,
And
what I find really interesting too is that, his whole thing was building the Integratron to make people live longer, so they will be wise enough, live long enough to achieve the wisdom, uh, to achieve a certain degree of wisdom. And he actually died kind of young before he
yeah,
could finish it. And it's kind of
right.
interesting that, it's almost something like, personal communication for his personal journey.
Mm,
If you want to, but yeah, I think it the idea that all the contactees got totally discounted, uh, in the, back in the early days of the flying saucer investigators, um, it did become an absolute circus.
mhm,
But, it's, if it wasn't for John Keel, all that stuff would have been just completely gone. And I th
right.
find it really interesting that,
Because he covers it pretty extensively in Operation Trojan Horse, especially
mhm.
some of the other ones. And
That's my favorite book of his, by the way, Operation
that's a great
Trojan
one.
Horse. Yeah, I really
It's a
like
good,
that.
yeah.
That's him at his most, clear-headed, as far as I'm concerned, most succinct and clear-headed. His other stuff, like, the Eighth Hour is kind of, Well, I mean, the Eighth Tower, a lot of that was taken from his outtakes from the Mothman prophecies.
Yeah, yep.
Uh,
It's
Um,
heady stuff.
yeah, it's heady and it's sprawling. It's
Right.
like it just it's like being in a pinball machine, kind of, being bounced from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another, to another.
Yeah, yep.
Which is, and why I love the Mothman prophecies, because it's very little of that is about the Mothman. There's
Yeah, it's
all
so much
this
more
Long
about,
Island stuff, all this Men in Black stuff. There's
yeah,
so much more in that than just the Mothman.
yeah,
And
and being out in the hills, shining a flashlight at UFOs and all that stuff, and yeah,
yeah, what's funny
um,
is I've been to the area where he calls Mount Misery.
hmm
It's not, there's no such place. There's
oh,
Mount Misery Road. The actual mount, it's actually kind of a leftover from the glacier. Just this
hmm
big pile of the terminal moraine. It was a favorite haunt of Walt Whitman's. They actually have a Walt Whitman memorial, I think a statue of him up over there. But it's very nice hiking and a really cool, strange place. Nothing weird happened to me out there. But
nothing
but
miserable either. I take it.
nothing miserable either.
Yeah.
But I find it, what
Well, I
I love
assume
it.
you've been to the TNT area as well.
Yeah, when I was in Point Pleasant,
Yeah,
I managed to get into one igloo. The weather was pretty messed up, and in order to, I hate driving,
yeah,
and there's one area of the road that was super flooded, and I was driving a Prius,
yeah,
and I was very frightened as I went through this big, wash, and got through to the other side. And it was kind of scary, but I managed to find the TNT.
but we need to get
And
you a Jeep, Charles.
no, with a chauffeur. I hate to drive. Uh, but I did go into an igloo, and I had a field recorder with me. I talked about this on Where Did the Road Go? And I happen to have a Tascam field recorder with me. Uh, and outside, there's this, it's swampy, marshy, and there are all these bugs like really going to town, like really great sounds. And I press record, and I'm like, doing a soundscape, and I'm recording the bugs, and then I walked into the igloo, and inside the igloos were, for the listeners, concrete domes. The TNT, they manufactured TNT during the World Wars, and they stored the munitions in these big concrete domes that they covered with dirt and grass to hide it from the air. And so the domes, it's turned into the McClintock Wildlife Refuge area, and the domes are still there. And you walk in, the reverb's amazing. Actually, Small Town Monsters, uh, Seth Breedlove, Small Town Monsters, they do an episode of the Mothman. They actually, uh, inside one of the igloos, they project an interview with Mary Mallett,
hmm
talking about her Mothman experience, where she had her child and the Mothman raised up and she collapsed. Said she was
Yeah,
afraid she
yeah.
killed her child. That whole bit. And they're doing it in there, and the reverb is amazing. So I was in there, and it
Wow.
really was. So going from the bugs into the igloo, and then splashing around, there's water in there, and little puddles and gravel, and just making all the sounds inside the igloo. It created a pretty cool soundscape. But
Well, I mean, here's a thought. Well, you could probably take a sound bath in one of those things, like the Integratron.
right?
You could
Ooh.
turn one of those igloos into like its own found Integratron. You know?
Well, you ought to talk to the Chamber of Commerce. I think we got something there. And they do
Yeah,
it at the Integratron.
yeah.
Yeah, there's the people who took over the Integratron. do a whole thing like that.
Yeah, I've heard. I'd love to do
Yeah.
it someday if I ever get out there. But yeah, I mean that would be kind of cool. But given the Indrid Cold thing, it's like it might extend your life, but you have to become a space nudist in order to benefit from it.
Ah, that's such a
but,
wonderful book. Jesus.
but well, see, those are my favorites. I absolutely love a contact ebook. Like I
Yeah.
can just take one of those out and read it in an afternoon, and I'm just happy for the rest of the day. I'm like, it's
Right.
so
Yeah.
good. Yeah,
Buck Nelson's is great. And but and also Frank Strange's. Oh my God. I love Frank
yeah.
Strange's.
His books are great because there's very little book in them. It's a lot of photos and like little snippets here and there. He's for a doctor. He wasn't much of a writer. The Saucerama, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty much a picture book.
Yeah. But that's I don't for I think for a lot of people it might be kind of hard to grasp the way, people like you, me, Aaron Gullius, a lot of people really groove on this subject, which is, all this silliness is a part of it
Mhm.
and a real fun part of it. But there's also a part of it that is just perplexing and really gets you thinking deeply about a lot of things. There are some cases where you're just like, wow, I mean, beyond just somebody said something, and there's corroborating evidence. I mean, the
Right.
Sanfreda case is amazing. You know the Sanfreda case, right? The Italian Carbonieri, he was basically a security guard, um,
Was
checking
that was that on Mount Etna?
Sanfreda. Hmm?
Was that at Mount Etna? Or
Tariglia, Italy.
okay.
This guy claimed to, he was checking out a house. He saw some activity in a house. I think we're in I think we're in the Italian Alps. They're definitely mountains.
Okay.
Um, and he's checking out this house. This is 1978. And he comes upon a 9 foot creature with big triangular yellow eyes. Describes his mouth kind of looked like a grill, and uh, he said he fired upon it, and then it got into its craft and buggered off. When his fellow security people came to get him because the word I think he had radio communication with them, and so they knew where he was, but they weren't getting in touch with him, so they went to check him out, and they found him face down on the ground, and 6 shots had been fired from his revolver, and there was this weird horseshoe impression in the grass, and he told this story, and then he ended up told a story that he got taken aboard the craft and had communication with these creatures, and there were a lot of them. And he has this whole, and it's the whole contactee thing where take care of your planet kind of message. And but the weird thing is that he claimed that he'd his coworkers were getting back at the dispatch, he's talking to them over his radio, saying, I think my car is under control. It's being, it's driving itself, and he's driving up into the mountains. And he goes from point A to point B. They find him at point B with the car abandoned. The car is really hot inside. They find him on a cliff. I mean, on a ledge, off a drop off, like a big cliff, and he's on a ledge. They pull him up from the ledge, the top of his head. It's really cold out, but the top of his head is really hot. And, this is all their corroborating testimony. And they also did the guy who wrote about this was actually an Italian journalist who wrote for an Italian newspaper, Rino di Stefano, and he's the investigator. And he wrote a really good book about this. And he got all the corroborating testimony from this guy's coworkers, and they he did a test drive with one of the security people, and there was just no way this car could have gotten from point A to point B, especially at night in the conditions that this guy was driving. They found that impossible. And so there's that, and there's also another really good story about Reno Di Stefano had some people rig up this guy's car because he kept claiming his car was lifted up into the craft. So they rigged his car with cables uh, that if it was lifted up, the wheels would drop.
Hmm.
They had independent axles. The wheels would drop and break the cables. He also set up a thermometer in the car that would record the highest temperature. And sure enough, has an episode, says, car's being taken out of my control, blah, 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 and he's gone, and no communication. They find him, and they take the car back, check it, and the cables are broken, and the last temperature recorded is like really high. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's an amazing story. Um,
That's some pretty clever data collection right there.
yeah, and actually, it's one of my favorite things too, is, my favorite things to write from are newspaper accounts.
Mhm.
And so this is, an actual, newspaper, a reporter who, actually, according to him in his book, started off like, I don't want to touch this. You guys are crazy. What a silly story, that came into their paper. And then when he, looked into it, he got intrigued and just got sucked into it, and then really went down the rabbit hole and ended up with this book. But my favorite, I love reading newspaper accounts by journalists, reporters who, aren't particularly interested in UFOs or flying saucers, and then they get into it and they're like, hmm, there might
Yeah,
be something to this. And they just report it, as like with journalistic integrity.
yeah.
Uh, but it's
I've
interesting
been
to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I've been meaning for a long time to write about the opposite end of that, which is I'm sure you've come across this a million times, where it's more of like an opinion piece, and it's just the journalist is just making fun of UFOs and saucers and the people that believe in them. I'm just like, yeah, there's a whole study to be done just on the dismissiveness and the mockery,
Yeah,
that came to be typified by people like Philip J. Klass, or he kind of became the face for that kind of thing
yeah.
as
I
a
actually, I,
skeptic. But
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I actually got called out for referencing Philip J. Klass. Sometimes he actually did some good research.
yeah, right. Well,
But
I
most
well
of the times he was an
I'm
a-hole.
of the opinion that we need the skeptics, but yeah, I mean, he
Oh,
can be a jerk
absolutely.
about it is the
Yeah.
thing. Like, yeah, and I find that some of the skeptics are dangerously disingenuous about how they go about it. Like,
Well,
uh,
sometimes the explanation is sillier than the
yeah,
original story, you know?
yeah, or they'll just fake they'll lie about
Yeah.
their explanation. The Amazing
Yeah.
Randy got caught doing that a couple times.
Yeah. But
And Philip J. Klass ended up having to pay Stanton Friedman at
mhm.
one point because
Yep.
Friedman found the typewriter that allegedly the Army never used for their memos.
Hmm.
Yeah, um,
Yep. But
but But yeah, I mean, it is kind of cool when you see these people. Now, was that the case for Fuller, the guy that wrote the Exeter incident and the Betty and Barney Hill story originally?
What about it?
Was he like kind of not really interested and then ended up getting sucked in because he found the story compelling?
You know,
Or
I don't know enough about Fuller to
yeah,
comment on that. No.
I've always
Uh,
kind of wondered because it seemed like it seemed like he hopped onto that bandwagon in a way,
mm,
because he was. um, yeah, I
yeah,
think the Betty and Barney Hill book came out first, and then when the Exeter event happened, he jumped right on it. So
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, but yeah, yeah, I like the UFO news clipping service. You can find all of them at AFU,
yeah,
Archives for the Unexplained. And I just, that's a real go-to when I'm really hunting for something to write about. In this week's blog, it's like, oh, what am I going to write about now? And I'll troll, I'll find a year. I try and go for the most recent year. Unfortunately, I think it stopped in like 2000, maybe 2008.
mm,
But you know, it's a real drag trying to write about contemporary stuff
yeah,
because you can't find it anymore. It's driving me nuts.
right,
I'm going to start looking at Bufora. Bufora still puts out, British UFO Research Association, still puts out uh, stuff, talks about, recent cases. You can find stuff, there's the MUFON Journal, but MUFON is just
mm.
sold out years ago. So,
Well,
um,
plus the stuff isn't even really accessible. Um,
well, you
you have to be a
gotta,
member, and then even then, you don't have full access to the
yeah,
materials. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the one thing I like to do as a writer, in my books and my blogs is present all my references with stuff that's accessible to anybody.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I'll reference a book, that okay, you got to buy the book, or maybe you can find a PDF. But for the most part, I really like to reference, the accessible archives, um, so that the reader can, go on the same go down a rabbit hole if they want to go down a rabbit hole, for instance.
right,
But just uh, but that's what I like to do. So, yeah, so like the MUFON Journal, for instance, yeah, it's something you got to pay for. You have to have a subscription in order to get it. And but yeah, what I was saying is finding those stories, like there was the Peru story with the they said they were uh, illegal gold miners with jetpacks. Uh,
oh yeah, yeah,
remember that? Yeah, with the
yeah,
and that actually, I managed to get a really good story out of that. And there's an interest, quite an intrepid researcher. There's a really good YouTube thing. I forget the guy's name, but he actually went down there. He got funding from a church, and the story is that these villagers were being terrorized by these creatures that were on this platform, uh, essentially like a hoverboard kind of thing. Um, flying around and terrorizing the villagers. And one girl got dragged off, and it it was a real thing. The villagers were really terrorized and had actually cleared a huge area of forest around their village, so they could have some um, clear area between them and the forest. And this guy actually went down there, and there's this really great thing where he he drinks their local intoxicant, which is made up of some root that the women chew and
Mm,
spit into a vat, and it ferments and makes this alcoholic brew. So he was brave enough to drink it. Um,
mm,
and it's a really interesting video, and um, the idea that the government put out was that this was illegal gold miners with jetpacks. And that theory just doesn't wash. There's so many problems with it in terms of, how long can a jetpack last? Why would they, how much,
right.
why would they do this? Blah, 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 blah. And so when investigating it, I actually found there's this long standing thing between indigenous peoples in South America, confronting government incursion, corporate incursion of their native lands, for the purposes of exploiting them, and these interesting mythos of these kinds
Yeah.
of things coming out, and all these papers
Huh.
that were written about it. So, that was one of the latest things I was able to get from the modern news feed. But most of the news feed today, it's so hard to find anything
Well,
to,
and you can't trust most of it too, is the thing. Like, I see wild stories come across from questionable sources all the time, and I don't even click on the links anymore because I'm just like, I don't, I don't know that I can trust this.
yep.
And people are willing to jump to aliens at the slightest suggestion of it. I remember a couple of years ago they had that incident at a mall in Florida
Yeah,
where
yeah,
tons
yeah,
of
yeah.
police showed up, and the internet went nuts saying it was like some shadow being and an alien running around the mall, and that's why all the cops were there. And it's like, uh, no, I don't see anything in this video. I don't see what you people are seeing. It's like
Yep.
there were no lights in the sky attached to this. I'm like, people have really lost their damn minds, man.
Yeah. 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 And people like you and me are saying you people are nuts.
Yeah, basically, if we're saying you're nuts, we're talking to
You,
give us our Venusian space dogs and space
absolutely.
pancakes.
I believe in
Yeah.
alien pancakes, but you people are effing crazy. Yeah, actually, one of my favorite stories came, I think it was 2018. A woman in Florida claimed she saw this creature walking. She's, sitting on her porch, and she sees this creature, you know, walking across the very edge of her lawn. She described, said it had its eyes were bulbous, kind of poking out of its head, and its jaw, if you compared it to a human jaw, would be like comparing uh, uh, a bulldog's to a chihuahua's. And she said she saw it walk across the lawn and then climb up an invisible ladder into an invisible craft. And its upper part, as it seemed to go into the invisible craft, disappeared and
Hmm.
then went up, and that was it. And
Huh.
yeah, and I was like, oh my God. I was so happy to see a story like that. And there was also very recently another story, I think 2020, a couple of hunters in Taos, New Mexico, reported creatures. Oh yeah, this is a great story. They reported seeing what they saw. Uh, they're driving in the mountains, and they saw what looked like this huge tent-like structure. They thought it was maybe film crews shooting, because there's a lot of film going on in New Mexico nowadays. And then they went down a dip, came up another dip, and the whole thing was gone. They said it was this huge structure, and they were just
Mm.
absolutely mystified that this thing disappeared. And then they go out and they're going out and doing their hunting thing, and this guy described seeing these creatures like across the way that wearing these strange banana colored clothes, I think it was, and just the shape of their heads were weird. But it was a really, really good story. And it's like, oh God, you don't see this stuff anymore, and
Yeah,
it's so
right.
rare. And it used to, you go through the UFO news clipping service and they're all over the place. And it's like,
Mhm.
where have they gone? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. I've thought about it sometimes with, everybody says everybody has a camera in their pocket all the time now, but that camera also has um, an infinite entertainment factory within it, where people are staring at it all the time, so they're not looking in the sky or looking around anymore to see the things to take pictures of. Um, but beyond that, there was always this idea in the 60s and 70s that with the proliferation of power lines and radio towers and things like that, that the electromagnetic frequency was opening up our dimension to other things to come in. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like I came across this a bunch of times in a bunch of different books from back then.
That's it. I
Oh,
haven't. That's interesting. I haven't. But
uh,
I it, I just mentioned it because I've looked at everything and I'm you're educating me right now. That's what
oh,
I'm
okay.
trying to
Well,
say.
I mean, well, one of the one example I can think of at the top of my head is Janet and Colin Board in their book Alien Animals. That's a great book.
Oh, yes, I've
Uh,
heard of it. Yeah.
Yep. But also, like a lot of these anthology style ones, people
Hmm.
would. I feel like it's conjecture that I came across that there was a connection between electromagnetic frequencies and fields and the manifestation of a lot of these entities like UFOs, sometimes Bigfoot or other things like that. Um, but I wonder though, because with like FiOS and things like that, where you're not really broadcasting to antennas anymore for TVs. People are getting it through direct lines. I wonder if that closed up like whatever portal was being
That is a
proposed back then. You
cool,
know,
cool. That's a really cool speculation. I like that. Wow.
right? There's a lot of things like that because also,
Well, I mean, there's the idea that blowing up the first atomic bomb like opened up things.
yeah. But have you ever looked into Operation Starfish Prime?
It
This is
rings a bell, but go on.
this was the detonation of nuclear devices in space, test them in space, which actually permanently, well, I mean, for all intents and purposes, permanently altered the Van Allen belts, the radiation belts that we had out there. And this would have been right around the time that contactees became less fashionable. So this is in the 60s. So, this is after the first wave of contactees. So it was one of those things where you wonder if this stuff was actually coming from space and we had these Van Allen belts that had only just been discovered, and then we go nuke it. So now the bands of radiation around the Earth have changed shape. What does that do to these like interstellar signals?
Wow, wow.
This is the stuff I think about late
Okay.
at
All
night.
right on.
Yeah,
So
but yeah, yeah, very interesting stuff. Um, Well, I mean, now I'm gonna have to get I'm gonna have to get the Crash Saucers book as well because I enjoyed the Flying Saucer Investigators. And like I said to listeners, because I know I have a lot of people that listen for various reasons. Everybody likes the weird stuff, but it's like everybody has their own particular singular interests as well. And if you're not as well versed on the flying saucer history, or even if you are and you just want like a good fun primer on it, it is a great book. It's a great one to orient you and make you familiar with all the big names going back to the beginnings of flying saucerdom. So I very much appreciated the book, Charles. Very good. And
Thank you, sir.
so when do you expect that you'd be completing the UFO investigators? That's a work in progress now, right?
Yeah, I'm 100 pages in, so
Okay.
we'll see. I'm hoping end of this year kind of thing.
So you're at
Uh,
about 1989, or
no, I'm in 1978, as a matter of fact.
you're still in 1978 with
And
100 pages. Yeah.
1978 is an amazing year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, you want to wrap up, I know.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. What I was going to say, yeah, if uh, as far as finding my book, the Flying Saucer Investigators, second edition, the good version, um, you know, the much more uh, tight and neat version. Um, I'm unfortunately competing against myself because the old version is still up there, even though it's not available.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you search The Flying Saucer Investigators by Charles Lear, the first edition comes up. So if you go to Amazon.com and type in Charles Lear in the search, then my books will come up. So you get the Flying Saucer Investigators, Crash Saucers and Malevolent Aliens, and the second edition of Post-Apocalyptic Macbeth and the Girls, which is the first book I ever wrote, which is about
Now what?
me producing Macbeth on a rooftop in East Williamsburg Industrial Park in Brooklyn in 2006, before cell phones. And anyway, um,
Well, okay. What is your thought on saying the name of that play while you're doing it? Or do you ascribe to the
oh
superstition
yeah,
of?
yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I
Okay.
respect tradition. Okay, as far as actually being superstitious about it, no,
Yeah.
but I do respect tradition. Turn around three
Yeah.
times and spit. That's what you're supposed to do as an actor.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
but the book I wrote about it, it'll make you think twice.
All right.
Yeah, what's really funny is I'm hoping to talk about it on Where Did the Road Go with Soraya. I sent it to Soraya because I realized, I re-edited that as well because it's the same story. When I first put out the book, that was my first self-published book. Um, I had no idea how to format a book, and I actually entered the page numbers manually, like literally put them into
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
text. I had no idea how to work Word back then. And now I
Right.
know what the hell I'm doing. And so I said, this book does, as I was doing the second edition of Flying Saucer Investigators, I said, this book deserves to be read, and deserves it deserves better treatment. So
Yeah. Well, it
edit
sounds great.
I
I want to check it out.
I yeah. So I'll give you that one.
All right.
Uh, so yeah, I re-edited that, and when I was, that I was kind of in a Kerouac phase, not in a Kerouac phase. Let's just say I was afraid of commas.
Okay. Yeah.
But in any case, I edited that book, and I'll wrap this up. Um, I put it out in a nice tight edition again. But when I was doing it, I realized there was a lot of weird paranormal stuff. And I wasn't writing it as a guy into the paranormal. It's
Mhm.
not like something I, especially back then, I still don't define myself. I'm into it. Um, uh, but in terms of it defining who I am, especially back then, that was not me. And when I wrote it, a lot of weird shit happened during this period. And it's in the book. And when I went to edit it, I'm looking at it and I'm like, huh, it's all the stuff they talk about on Where Did the Road Go?
Yeah,
Huh, maybe I'll send it to Raya. And I sent it to him. He said, yeah, let's talk about it. So, yeah, that's it's interesting because a lot of strange stuff happened during that. So, if there's anything to the being superstitious about saying the name of Macbeth while you're doing the play in the theater, that's the thing. You can say
right.
it
Yeah,
any okay, that
yeah.
that that's
Outside of it, yeah,
that's a superstition. But
yeah.
yeah, while I was producing Macbeth and a lot of weird stuff happened. Just
Hmm.
saying. Okay.
All right.
Anyway,
Um, yeah, and people can find your blog at Podcast UFO, the website.
podcastufo.com. Yep.
Right. Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah.
he also turns it into, I turn it into an audio blog uh, every week as well. So
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah. Excellent. Well, it's very nice to meet you, Charles, and talk to you tonight. This has been a blast. I think people will really enjoy this show. So thank you
cool.
so much for coming on.
Right on. Yeah, pleasure to talk to you,
Yeah.
AP.
All right. Talk
Mr.
soon.
Strange.
Yeah. There
Yeah,
you go.
I'm actually absolutely thrilled to have uh, your contact on my phone that says AP Strange, and it's like,
Good stuff. Yeah,
right on.
all right.
All right, kiddo.
Uh, Talk soon.
All right, cheers.